Hey, listeners, thank you for tuning in again to another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. This may be episode 100. We are right around that number, including bonus episodes that have come out. Thank you so much for listening for all this time. I cannot tell you how much it means to me. So, thank you. A couple of quick updates, and then we'll jump right into the episode. First off, we have now picked our 2 barrels of Jack Daniel's Barrel Proof Rye. I was down in Nashville in June, picked 2 barrels that were completely different from each other, but both just knocked our socks off. So those are going to be going live sometime in the early fall. I will keep you up to date on that. Number 2, we have multiple other barrel picks coming. The first one that's probably going to come out is going to be a barrel rye finished in Armagnac casks. This was chosen in partnership with Perry over at This Is My Bourbon Podcast. So you co-listeners are really going to love that. And we are brainstorming some sticker ideas right now that is going to make it even more attractive for your shelf. Hopefully you'll drink it, but it'll be good for the shelf too. Another barrel pick coming out, Spirits of French Lick, is getting chosen as we speak, and I'll keep you updated on that. Last thing, and then I'll let you go right into the episode, is during my last update, I mentioned that there were 4 spots available at that top tier of $25 a month. At $25 a month on Patreon, you get not only first access to, well, everything, and access to everything that I put out, but you also get top tier priority for barrel picks when they come out. You also get the opportunity to join me on a barrel pick. Already, we've had members of that tier down with me in Nashville for the Jack Daniel's pick, helping out on the Spirits of French Lick pick, and also giving some input on the barrel pick. So every pick from now and going forward is going to have a Patreon member, at least one from that tier, on the pick with us. As of today, there is only 1 spot remaining in that $25 tier. So if you've been holding out, if you're pushing it off for any reason, I'd say jump on it, because this spot is probably going to go quickly. With that, I'll say, of course, if the $25 is out of your range right now, we still want you to be a supporter. We still want you to be involved. The next tier down, $5 a month, is going to get you that second access to all barrel picks. I can't speak for the $25 tier, but pretty sure there'll still be some barrels and bottles available for you at the $5 a month tier. That just really helps us grow, covers expenses, and keeps the podcast going with these awesome guests that we've got. All right, I have talked for almost 3 minutes. That is a ton of time. I am sorry for that, but with that, that's all the updates for this month. I'll keep you updated as they go along. Now, here's a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today, we are going to, I believe, a state we haven't been to before. We're going down to Missouri. And yeah, actually, we haven't been there for Cooperages either, so we're going to Missouri for the first time. And with me to talk about Ben Holladay Bourbon and McCormick Distilling, we've got Kyle Merklein and Jordan Germano. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having us. Excited. I that's really exciting that we're the first Missouri. Jordan is all Missouri all the time, so that has to make her happy for sure.
I love Missouri and Missouri everything, right? Kyle and I always banter back and forth because he went to school at K-State and I went to Mizzou. So all about the Missouri.
All right. So you got a serious rivalry going on just right there. So
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it serious because K-State's clearly better, but otherwise, no, I'm just kidding. No, we have fun with it.
That's my bet. I gave him that opening, so that's
yeah, exactly. It was right there. No, it's always fun. Sports is fun.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you don't take it too seriously.
I'm a Mets fan. I can't take anything too seriously right now. So yeah, we I try to go to different states. I just posted the 100th episode, and between different states and different countries and such, we'll eventually get to everything. But Missouri, for whatever reason, it's geographically not too far from where I'd venture. I feel like I've gone around it. I've gone to Virginia, of course, Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, but not to Missouri. So with all of that said, glad to have you guys on to be the first. And so just to set some context, back in mid 2022, sitting at home one day and I get this package. And at that point, I was getting a lot of packages, which my wife was not happy about. But
but I opened this one up. I was like, I don't know who this is from. And open it up. It's this beautiful presentation. I see Ben Holladay Distilling, or Ben Holladay Bourbon and McCormick Distilling. And I was like, oh, this is quite nice. It's quite new. It's a beautiful presentation set. It's got the bottle, the glass. And I tried it, had knowing zero about anything having to do with the brand, the history, anything. And I was like, damn, this is actually really good. And since then, I've kind of been in contact off and on with you guys, with Noelle, which I'll bring her in a second. And since then, I've been wanting to talk about the products. And after your recent release for the soft winter wheat, the soft red wheat, excuse me, then just was a perfect opportunity to do so. So with that, let's just jump right in with the, if you want a brief history of, Ben Holladay and how it started.
I'm going to defer to Jordan because she is much better with history than I am. I was not good at history in school. I like the show Drunk History, but I'll let Jordan cover that one.
Yeah, I always like to take the history, then I leave the science to Kyle because that's also not my deal. So as far as the history goes, so our distillery has been around since 1856. It was established by a man named Ben Holladay, who was indeed from Kentucky. So whenever he came to Missouri, he brought the knowledge of bourbon with him. And when he settled in Weston, Missouri, which is where our distillery is located, he discovered on the property he had purchased that there were limestone springs. And he knew what that was good for. He knew that was good for making bourbon. So in addition to many other business endeavors that he had, he started the Holladay Distillery. So fast forward several years, his brother David was running it for a while, and then it actually left the Holladay hands in the early 1900s. But it's really, Ben went on to do some amazing, amazing things himself. He was actually at one point the largest private employer of the United States. So outside of the federal government, he had the most employees spread out for all of his businesses, which is truly incredible to think about today, especially since nobody really knows who he is. That's something that really baffles us, that yes, the distillery is the only thing left standing, but he had this incredible career and this incredible story. So we stopped distilling bourbon back in the 80s. So around 1985, we had stopped distilling bourbon because nobody was drinking it. And we focused on a lot of other clear spirits and other packages. And then in 2015, we were kind of like, what are we doing? Bourbon's back. And we're sitting on this amazing property with this limestone spring water source and just rick houses that you do not find outside of Kentucky and Indiana. It's like, why aren't we using this? So that's when we decided we were going to buy new equipment and resurrect the process. And then Ben Holladay Bourbon was born.
So definitely one of my questions was going to be, why stop distilling in 85? It makes sense. That was the clear spirit boom, for the next 20 years. It really was that. Yeah. But officially, though, the distillation, let's say, never really stopped. It's been continuously operating, as far as maybe, because you had we'll get to the Prohibition thing in a second. But so distillation has never stopped on the site, just bourbon production did for about 30 years.
Yes and no. This is also kind of a complicated question because so we have been in business for over 170 years, or 160 years, excuse me. But there was a time where whenever we stopped distilling in the 80s, we actually weren't distilling any other products on site. So we were still importing a lot of products and distributing them as a supplier. And we were also doing a lot of blending and bottling with our state-of-the-art bottling facility, but there was actually no distillation taking place on site. So it was pretty incredible that we took on that investment and got all that new equipment to really get it started again. It was, Kyle, you have to tell me if this is wrong, but we really just kind of had to look back at our records, and there were some employees that had been there to distill in the past, correct?
Yep. There were still a couple on site that had distilled bourbon. And yeah, that is true. I can't, we had a different owner at the time. And that ownership group did choose to shift their bourbon production. They had another facility in Illinois, and so they shifted it to that. They also had other production facilities making other, clear spirits, and so that was the ownership then. And then in the 90s, when we went private, that kind of disappeared, but we had that partnership still with them. So the distillation on site didn't happen, but for any of the other products. But yeah, when we wanted to bring it back in 2015, we had he was one of them, especially was helpful in the process. Dennis was his name, and he had been around back when they were distilling back in the 80s, and he had just started his career kind of in that time frame. So he'd worked in the still house back then, knew the process, knew the records, kind of knew where everything was. But he transitioned when they shut that down. He transitioned to doing stainless steel welding. And so he stayed with our company. He welded up a lot of pipes for our bottle shop. He did all the maintenance work, and he transitioned to that area. And then fast forward 2015, he essentially helped put that place back together. So he was welding up pipes to bring back bring back the distillery. And so then he also kind of was a part of that, bringing back the records and looking at all those lab things that he did. He didn't necessarily know everything, but he was able to point us in the right direction and give us clues. And that was a big part of bringing it back. And so it was a lot of, whether it was digging in with talking with him, other employees that we could find around the area that maybe still didn't work for us, but were around, or just in general, all the records that you have. When it's a highly regulated industry, like what we live in, the government made everyone keep very strict records. If they wanted to change their mash bill for a different season, back in the day, they would have had to send a letter to the federal government saying, hey, we would like permission to run 32 batches of, bourbon using this mash bill. And it would list it out. And so you could go back in, and it was very easy to kind of look at that. And so, yeah, it was resurrecting the past through every single way that we could at the time. So, yeah, it was a big puzzle that had to be put together. And I think, overall, not every answer, we didn't get every answer to the puzzle, but I think, got it very, very close, and very proud of what we're at. And I think it's, as close as we possibly could to bring back the past.
Mm-hmm. And when between Dennis and the rest of the records that you have, I guess the question could go two ways. One way is, were you able to recreate the structure, the stills, and all of that as it was? Or maybe that answer is moot, and what changes did you make in recreating the structure?
Yeah, so when looking at it from the core of producing bourbon, so we thankfully still had the limestone spring on site that they had been using and that had been charted by Lewis and Clark. So we had that limestone spring water with that cistern holding, 45,000 gallons of water. And so we had that available. So we started with that. That's the beginning. From there, it was a lot of bring back the concept and as much as we could. So 2-cooker system, which was important. That was what we used to do. So we cook the large grains and the small grains separately. We handle those independently. And so, the large grain for us, because we're making bourbon, is always corn. That's the primary grain in our mash bill. And then in that small cooker, we take those either wheat or rye and handle those independently and try to extract and get as much flavor from those as we possibly can. So that was one concept we brought back. From there, we had to, we'll start, just kind of go down the line of making bourbon. So the whisk or the yeast, we didn't have a proprietary strain that we could recover. 30 years was a long time. And in addition to that, prior to them shutting down in the 80s, they actually switched from propagating their own yeast on site to purchasing yeast in the 70s. And so at that point, it was, hey, what can we do that creates what yeast can we find that's commercially available that produces a congener profile as close as possible to what we were? And so that was the goal. We went out and found a bunch of different yeast strains, and we We propagated them on the different mash and grew them and fermented and kind of just did as close of a replication as possible. It would be perfect. I would love to, find that yeast strain. I've looked. There's nothing on site that like I wish that I could find in a back of a warehouse somewhere, an old propagation tank or something, but haven't had any such luck. So that was kind of one interpretation, I guess, at that point. In terms of fermentation, we knew how long they fermented. And so we went back with that as well. Same fermentation period, conditions, style. And then from distillation standpoint, we had an old still on site. It was a 36-inch column still and a doubler paired with it as well. And we had actually purchased it used back in the day. And so this still had been around for a while. And it was one where we brought in Vendome, the group from there, and we had them look at it, but it couldn't be revived. It was past its prime. And so unfortunately, at that point, had to make the decision to buy a new still. And so we went with, again, as close as possible. It's not the 36-inch column still like what we used to have. We went with an 18, knowing one reason for that, or the primary reason, was that back in the past, they would also distill only during the winter season. And then they would be shut down during the summer. And so we essentially have the same capacity, but we're doing it year round rather than just having it done in a couple 3 or 4 month period. And so we didn't need that 36-inch column still. From there, went with the same type of barrel, Char 3 barrel, from the same manufacturer, Independent Stave in Lebanon, Missouri. And then aging still in the same rick houses. And so really we brought back as much as we could. The process itself was all intended to be as close as we possibly could with today's equipment, with a cooling tower rather than using limestone spring water to cool off your fermentation. Stuff like that was kind of bringing it back to the modern era rather than the true old school way of making it. Maybe we'll do a batch or two the old style way, but we wanted to make sure that we had the best technology available to make consistent, top quality bourbon when we brought it back.
I mean, I just got back a few days ago now from Jack Daniels. So if we're talking size differentials, you don't get much bigger than that. And
yep.
They're talking about how, they have their spring on site, and for the yeast, they used to propagate the yeast, and then they'd put it in a jug and put it in the spring water because it was 55, 56 degrees year round.
Yep.
They've also shifted to a newer method using -80 freezers and all that. Yep. But there's always throwbacks whenever you can do it.
Yep.
So I guess the next step is going to be kind of creating a profile. So going back to what used to be created, I mean, did you have access to extant bottles of the distillate? And if so, how far back were you able to go?
Yeah, so we did have bottles on site, and so it depends on which stage we had. So we have a bunch of finished product and bottles that were finished bourbon packaged goods throughout the various years. The only lab standard that I know about was we had ones that were their quality control standards for the new make, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 7 and 10, I think is what it was broken down. And so we had a bunch of different samples that were their standard. That's what when they tasted or compared against, it was always that. And so we had that. I believe that was from the 60s was when it was from. And so mostly full. They probably hadn't been opened in a long time. So hopefully not much oxidative reactions had occurred during that time. There was probably some, but they in general tasted pretty similar to the other finished products that we had tried. And so felt pretty confident in that. But yeah, we had that available, not a ton. Not a bunch around. And so it was pretty limited quantities. But then again, had the finished product. We had quite a few of one of the old brands, BJ Holladay Private Keep. And those have diminished over the years. They've been in the executive office space, and it started out with quite a few. And I think I just saw there was 5 left. So, there's fewer and fewer of those ones remaining. Don't know where they're going.
So if you're looking to steal one, like, don't wait on it kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So so we're able to kind of to have examples of it, to recreate as much as possible. What, in going between those older samples from the 60s, including the new make, everything from the new make to the finished products, and what you've got now, skipping ahead a bit, what do you think is the biggest difference between them, and what was the hardest bridge to cross?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that ultimately, well, they kind of the answer, I think, will lead into itself. And so we had a lot of information about the still house itself. So we knew a lot about how they were producing it there. What we didn't have, we have 2 traditional rick houses on site that we age in. So they're both, 7-story structures, total capacity like 21,000 barrels on site. And so it's very traditional, not heated, not cooled, got windows built in. One was built in the third. When was B Warehouse built, Jordan?
1930.
30. And then the other was right after Prohibition, 42 or something like that.
50. Close.
Okay. See, there we go. So C Warehouse was built then. And so they've been around for a while. But we don't have all the records of what product was aged for how long, in which floor, which tier, any of the information about the aging itself. And so that was something that was a challenge. We have a few RIC books where it's like, okay, we pulled from here for this product and here for this product, but it wasn't universally known. In addition, I think they also didn't really think as much in that sense. I think it was a lot of back in the day, especially when you were closer to that 85 mark, when you just wanted to sell anything. It was let's get what's of age, let's dump it, let's get it down to lower proof so that people don't know that it has bourbon in this, and then let's bottle it. And so it wasn't a kind of, you didn't care as much about those floors. That those rick houses, while they're critical to what we're doing, we don't have that long-standing history with what aged where and what does the best in each location. So that's something we have to figure out as we go, and that's what we're learning as we continue to age these products. It was complete, you just fill it up and let's see. And so that's been a part of it. But I think the biggest difference is that we're kind of embracing that, and it's both a difference in what we're doing, as well as I think a difference in the consumer when we embrace that, it means that we're putting on the label where those barrels are selected for each batch. We're talking about that rick house and how those floors differ, and how we can kind of embrace those floors and create a slightly different bourbon each time. And so that's a big part of what we're doing, both in the Ben Holladay bourbon, which is our original mash bill, and the Holladay soft red wheat. We put full transparency on the label. Where are those barrels coming from? We want to talk about that. We don't necessarily know all the answers. I'm not going to admit that I do. But I think it's experimenting. It's seeing where it goes, what's everything tastes like. And I think it's, for the consumers to see that, I think it's a lot of fun. We're not just trying to hide behind things. We're not just trying to blend our way into making exactly the same flavor profile every time. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just not the route we wanted to go. And so we wanted to embrace that. And so that's, I think, to me, probably the biggest difference between back in the day versus now is kind of that focus in on the aging process and that rick house.
Gotcha. So I'm going to throw back a little bit now to even back farther in the history. So taking a wider lens, what does kind of distilling in Missouri look like? Like, some states we talked to, there's nothing. They were doing maybe brandy, maybe where they were doing more beer. Kentucky, Tennessee, obviously you've got Virginia, you've got long histories. So what is Missouri's history like in that respect?
Jordan, do you have an idea on this one?
Yes.
I can make stuff up, but I don't really honestly know.
So we have actually kind of tried to look into this ourselves. We have partnered with Michael Veach, bourbon historian, to try to figure out. So we are DSP Mo 5 is the number assigned to our distillery, but we can't find who DSP Mo 1 to 4 was. So the chances are that it's likely that it was us, which sounds kind of strange, but there's no record of anybody else before us. So there could have been, maybe it was the Blue Springs Distillery that was the first name actually of the Holladay family. And maybe those records have since changed. We don't know. But we do know that distilling in Missouri has for sure taken place since 1856. We are the oldest distillery in Missouri. So for a long time, there really, as far as I know, there weren't, it wasn't a very active distilling state. But now, if you were to go apply for a DSP in Missouri, it would be, tell me if I'm wrong, Kyle, like 2000 something at this point. Like there's been that many registrations.
Yeah, like I think I've seen some of the ones we've worked with and talked to. DSP mode 20,093, I think, is the one that I was thinking about. But yeah,
So
and
20,000.
yeah, so a few, but
yeah, it's a lot. We really embrace that DSP Mo 5. You'll see it on the back of all of our bottles, and it's really, if you truly kind of dial in on what that means, that's just kind of another nod to our history and just kind of really shows how long we've been around, which is pretty cool.
I guess those DSP was right after the Civil War, if I'm correct, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, because I think Jack is number 1, and then like Heaven Hill's number. There's something else. They're Kentucky after Prohibition, so 2 different numbers there. So right.
Yeah. So
I have no idea how those are assigned. I know Michael Veach, he talked about it before, and then I still don't know. But
yeah, it's a lot.
From the distilling sense in the state of Missouri, one thing I again, this is me I'll hopefully admit I'm making this up basically, but speculating. I mean, you do think like it's a ag state, right? Like this is also a place where corn is grown. It's not like Kentucky's original in that thought, and we're also a border state to Kentucky. And so if you think back, like Ben and David came up from Kentucky, I would venture to guess that there was others from Kentucky that came up here and probably had a similar thought process. It's not part of our history, so I wouldn't know necessarily, but my guess would be a similar of you have more of probably farmer distillers type of thing, rather than the, commercial enterprise necessarily, because Ben Holladay would have, and I'll let Jordan expand on this, but Ben Holladay, being the Stagecoach King, would have had at least a way to distribute his bourbon as well.
Yes. Right. So yeah, as we mentioned, that Ben being the serial entrepreneur that he was, so he was actually the founder of the Overland, or he owned the Overland stage lines. And so that was moving people and provisions out west. So if you think about it, being the businessman that he was, what bourbon do you think was heading west on those stage lines? We don't have proof of that either, but chances are it was Ben and David's bourbon, which is also really neat to think about.
Yeah. Fun to see if there's a museum in Portland where I know Ben ended up at the end of his life. They end up finding a bottle there that was brought along with them.
That would be cool.
That could be fun.
Yeah.
So because you have this long history, it's also fun to talk about being a Missouri representative in this case, because you have that long history. Mm-hmm. And the next place I want to jump to is during Prohibition. So during Prohibition, at that point, we were owned by Shawhan. Might be saying that wrong.
Shawhan, yes. George Shawhan.
Shawhan. So it would have been the Shawhan Distillery at that point, and he was allowed to distill during Prohibition for medicinal purposes. Now, most places were not allowed to do that. Have you found any reason or records as to either why or how they were able to continue to do so?
Oh goodness. Again, I could kind of speculate on this as well, but because we have always said that we could produce for medicinal purposes, but there were only, I believe, 4 or 5 licenses issued throughout the entire country to do so.
Right.
And I'm not so sure that we were physically distilling, but we were bottling and distributing. We know that for sure. But that is also kind of a gray area. And it really is crazy with our large history, how much we've really had to kind of dig back for how much was lost. And we're always so hesitant to say this for sure happened and this for sure happened when we haven't seen it fully written and logged anywhere in writing. So, and we aren't one of those companies that really likes to make up a marketing story. Like it's so real that we don't want to tamper with that. So, but we do
appreciate it for sure.
Yeah. And we do have bottles and history of packages that say for medicinal purposes, which is just fascinating in itself.
Right.
Yeah, the people could go and fill that prescription and get what they needed for their medicine. And yeah.
It's most fascinating to me for the reason, one of the reasons you just mentioned is that when you think about those 4 or 5, maybe 6 licenses that were available, the ones who got it were like Old Forester got it. Jim Beam didn't. Heaven Hill didn't exist at that point. You know, there are these brands that even then were the titans of the industry that didn't get those licenses, and that yet you guys did under the name at the time. So that would be a fascinating rabbit hole to go under. And as you're pointing out, there are a lot of rabbit holes to go down in this case. And you probably couldn't get a better partner than Mike Veach to do so. But
yeah, we love working with Mike. He's fantastic. I've learned so much from him every time he's visited us twice now. And we've just like tried to really, because if you're going to find out something historical, like who else are you going to go to besides Mike Veach if you want, you know, the good stuff. So yeah, it's pretty impressive and very fascinating.
Yeah, this is just a side note. I'm envisioning a project about Lou Rosensteel and Shenley, and I would really love to write a history on them or just do some research on them. And there's almost nothing on them, but I'm going to try to reach out to Mike, see what I can get. Also, Laura Patrizio, who's fantastic with just Pennsylvania and rye history and American whiskey history. There we go as well. I haven't even had anything to drink today, and I'm spilling over my words. But yeah, I love the historical aspects, and you know, we'll move on from them a little bit. But that stood out to me, the fact that at one point you were owned by MGP.
Yeah, many years.
Yeah, and when well, they're still based in Atchison, Kansas, but when they were more known for the Atchison, Kansas, as opposed to their Indiana plant, shall we say, Lawrenceburg plant. So you know, moving, I guess, closer to the more recent history, the last historical question would be, of the records that you have and the bottles that you have, was there a bottled-in-bond whiskey being produced? Like, was that a feature of Holladay?
Not as much from what I've seen. And so that's where I would say that is yet another kind of more of a current interpretation of it, because again, the consumer of today versus back then. But I have seen a few ceramic jugs that were bonded back in I can't remember what year they were. We have a bunch of old like decanters or a bunch of old different products around, and I've only seen like two or three maybe that have been bonded. So it wasn't a big part of what we were doing. No, it was a lot of the time, again, back in the 80s, it was a lower proof. And so, you know, the standard release was, you know, 80.6, and the premium release was 86.6, and the super premium release was 90.6. And so it was very, you know, the low proof type of thing. But yeah, not as much the bottled-in-bond piece. And I think that was a big part when we brought it back, and is truthfully telling that story, that we have an awesome story, an amazing story, and it's a real story. And but then also that we're not just making or taking the story and using another person's product. We wanted to bring it back, and so that was a big part of the process, and not sourcing anybody else's liquid. There is nothing wrong with that. I completely understand the business model. We're lucky in the sense that we didn't have to do that. And so we just wanted to speak to that it was bottled and bond, and this was our product.
So you get to the early 2010s, let's say. It's coming up on, you're past 150 years since the distillery is founded, and starting to think about, what if we resurrected this bourbon? What if we started distilling bourbon? It's been almost, I guess it would be 25 to 30 years at that point since you've done it. What were those conversations like when you were, talking to not just the team that we were producing, but also the team above you would be like, yeah, we have this new product that we want to bring on. What were those conversations like?
Well, I don't think either of us were part of those, actually. So we were both of us were brought on more because of the bourbon wanting to exist. And I think it was a lot of, as a company, our current president, Mick Harris, he wanted to shift more into premium products. He wanted to shift more into things beyond the value goods. And so that was something he's been working on for a while now. But he's a bourbon drinker, and I think that was also a piece to it. And then the thought of, okay, we have this history, we still have these rickhouses. A previous president wanted to tear those down, as a side note, because they were a insurance risk and liability and all of that. And thankfully, that didn't happen. But yeah, we wanted to bring it. He wanted to bring it back because of that history and the focus on premium products. And so that was the thought, and that was kind of how it began back in the day. And so how he pitched it to all the shareholders, I don't exactly know. That would have been, I would have enjoyed to be part of that conversation.
Fair enough. Then I'll flip it a little bit and say, what were the conversations like bringing on the two of you, and how were you convinced to join and make this product?
Well, I think Kyle, when did you join? Mine was 2015. You were probably shortly right thereafter.
Yeah, I was 16 with the bourbon. Yeah.
So I actually started as a marketing and sales rep just on the premium side. I did a lot of promotion for 360 vodka. So at that time when I was hired, bourbon, really, I didn't hear any talk at all. It was very, very little at that point. And then a few months into my employment, I started to hear about it. And then there was the day that they dropped the still in through the roof of the original still house. And we just sat there looking out and watching this happen, which was pretty incredible. Just this massive crane bringing it in. And then, and then I do remember the very first barrel that was filled. I got to see that and take photos, and that was pretty cool. But even at, in my late 20s, I didn't know anything about bourbon. I had no idea. And for the next several years, as they were making it and we were starting to age it, and I still didn't really know much about it. I knew it was coming, and I helped get the tours started of the facility. Even though we didn't have anything to taste yet, we were still trying to really improve the property and show people what we were up to. So, and then just in recent years, I've started spending more time like learning about it and hanging out with Kyle, learning the science side of it, or at least listening to the science side of it and trying to understand it. But it truly is such an art and a craft. And so I kind of went from neutral grain spirits all the way to like what I would call the good stuff now. So not that vodka is not good, but there's just a lot more that goes into this piece.
I'm not a hardcore vodka sucks person. It's not my thing. I don't enjoy it. I want to drink for the taste, but I won't crap on it. It's not my thing.
Yeah, no, it's good. It serves its purpose. That's for sure.
Exactly. And let's be honest. I mean, from a business perspective, for most companies, it's also paying a lot of bills that help to, keep the doors open and the lights on while the bourbon ages. So we can't look down our noses at it too much, because we want that bourbon at the end of the day.
Oh no. Yeah. I mean, we still sell a lot of vodka. It's a very big piece of our business. But yeah, it also is very fascinating how different every spirit is, and all the regulations that it takes and how you can make vodka in a day. But if you're going to make a bourbon, how are you going to make it? How long are you going to let it sit? And all of those things. It's very fascinating. And I think we're very fortunate because, we do get to work with so many different products. It's not always just bourbon all the time. So that actually does keep things pretty interesting for us, because there are so many aspects to the different products that we have in our premium brands portfolio.
And so I'm going to come back to that, but I want to give Kyle a chance to describe his entry.
Yeah. So I was somewhat late to the party, but I was kind of more brought on. Everything had gotten started back up. And my background is more in the science side of things. And so I have a bachelor's and master's in biological and agricultural engineering, knowing that I wanted to do some sort of value-added product with grain. I grew up on a farm, and I wanted to make sure I stayed in the agriculture adjacent field. Dad told me not to come back and farm because he hated. We were going through a drought for a couple years, and he was just very, very negative on farming. And I think if I called him tonight, he'd probably still be negative on farming. He's ready to retire next year. But he told me to not do that. And so I just wanted to stay still in the ag field. And so that's kind of how I got in the industry. My master's research was in fermentation, and I had moved up with my wife up here to Atchison, Kansas, and I was making neutral spirits, and then found out that there was a bourbon facility not too far away from here, and they were posting a job, and went there, and it was just I didn't know what to expect. I like to drink bourbon. I definitely like to drink it more than I do, vodka, but I was making neutral spirits, and it was a good job. And so it was, went over there and was just blown away by the facility, everything about it, the 160 acres and all the historic, the buildings and the rick houses and the limestone spring. It just blew me away. And so it was immediately like, okay, yeah, I want to be here. I want to make bourbon here. And so that was my kind of entry into it. And then it was from there, just kind of taking it over, getting it going day to day, trying to figure out how we can make this consistently, how we can kind of optimize it and keep it as running as smoothly as possible. We didn't want any deviations or any upsets in the still house. And then also any new product development or any new experiments, anything like that, kind of taking that and running with it. And so I was hired, I'm going to say primarily just for bourbon. And it was luck that kind of my path lined up here. I admit that fully all the time, because not often do you think in kind of just north of Kansas City that there's going to be a bourbon distillery open up that has every piece of the bourbon history. And so it was just a lucky aspect for me. I don't know if that actually answered your question or not.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's a good story, and I have definitely heard similar ones in terms of especially the conversations that you would have had with your dad about, like, don't come back to farm, to be adjacent, but be out of the field. I've heard similar things from people with similar backgrounds in distillation. Like, okay, so I'm going to go study bioengineering or fermentation studies, or even some who went to wood management or sommeliers. So there is something there, and I do like finding those clusters of stories. There's also the cluster of people who came from the wine industry into whiskey, and then very few, or fewer at least, who came from the beer industry into whiskey, even though you'd think that would be a more natural transition. And yet, I found that there's more on the wine to whiskey than the beer to whiskey side. But anyway,
I don't know a ton that have made the beer. I know a few, but definitely not a ton. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's weird. It just is that natural progression. You're just making a beer and distilling it. Granted, not every distiller's beer it's all technically potable, I would say, but you don't want to drink all of it.
Yeah, no, definitely not. That's for sure.
Yeah. But so Jordan, jumping back to the marketing side for a second, in doing the research for this episode, I noticed something that I did want to ask about, and feel free to say you either don't know or can't answer. That's always respected on this show. I did notice that there's a separation website wise and marketing wise, at least on the consumer side, between McCormick Distilling and the vodka, tequila, azules, liqueurs, all of that, and Ben Holladay Bourbon. And I just wanted to dive into the thought process behind that, and yeah, just from there.
Yes, this is always kind of a tough one to explain. I don't know that I do the best job, but so we became McCormick Distilling in 1942. That's when our name changed to McCormick Distilling. And McCormick Distilling is still very much alive and well today. We do have our McCormick family brands, and then we have, I believe at this point, we have almost 70 total different brands under our umbrella. If you really break down all the different flavors that we have of vodka, and that be McCormick and 360. And so we have a lot under our umbrella. But whenever we started bringing back the idea that we were going to make this bourbon, we really wanted to rededicate the site, not only to say we are doing the process here, to really separate and let people know that it was coming from this site and maybe not sourcing like we had done previously in the past. And also just to kind of ramp up that premium side. The current ownership group back when they purchased the company in the early 90s, they were the ones that really started this innovative process to think outside the box of outside of value brands. So I don't know if you've heard of a brand called Tequila Rose. Maybe looking, yep, just a little bit of Tequila Rose. And that was actually a huge, a big product innovation that kind of paved the way for a lot of other cream products to follow. It was actually the very first cream product that wasn't an Irish cream. So the first cream liqueur, I guess I should say, outside of an Irish cream. So that innovation has kind of just built over the years. And so it really was just a separation between this is where we're going on the Holladay side versus McCormick, but it's all one family. And now I don't know if I'm answering the question. But, yeah.
No, I think you did. And if I can kind of throw it back at you, and how I heard it and understood it is that, yes, it's the same company, it's the same family, but specifically because not only are you reviving this brand, but you're doing it in-house again after 30 years, and any number of things that kind of come with launching a new brand. And in some ways you can call it new, even though it's a revival, you can call it new. Because in 85, you wouldn't have had a website for it.
Exactly.
I think there's like one or two websites from 85. I don't know. Anyway, but so I understand it especially from a consumer facing standpoint of separating it. And this also goes back to something that, Kyle, you've mentioned several times about you have a different consumer base now. Mm-hmm. If you had a website in 85 and you were introducing the whiskey and bourbon that would have been created then, it would have been more towards the lower proof, targeting the clear spirits crowd. Mm-hmm. But today you've got a crowd that wants to know what rickhouse, what floors, what pardon me, what mash bill, the years, the temperature fluctuations. You have in a couple of the descriptions, you have the evaporation rates. Now that's getting to the really nerdy side, and that's where I thrive. But I can see why it's not. And this is to be clear from my perspective, it's not about hiding the connection. It's just that this is new, and you're serving a different clientele than you were before, and that you were from the McCormick side as opposed to the specifically Holladay side. Yeah, but it was something I noticed and definitely wanted to ask about.
Yeah, I think that definitely, that sums it up. But we're taking steps and we're doing things with the Holladay bourbon and with some of the other premium products like Five Farms Irish Cream, but where it's just completely different than what we would have done in the past because of the consumers and because of what we want to create with these products. And so it is just, we want to respect that, and we want to make sure that it's very, from the beginning, just kind of its own thing that stands alone, because we are putting so much into this that the bourbon, it is its own thing. It's the Holladay Distillery at our facility, but obviously ownership group, that matters. But it's just like, if you think about any type of product, I bet almost any industry would have a similar story. It's just with the different things, whether it's bottled water or cheese or whatever, you name it. So
this month's Impact Spotlight is on White Heather and McNair's blended whiskeys, and the tales of the two men who made these venerable brands what they are. The first is Billy Walker, a 2021 Icons of Whiskey Hall of Fame inductee and owner of the Glenallachie, another Impex brand and a recent podcast guest. Billy has over 5 decades of experience in the Scotch world. With White Heather unshow-filtered blended whiskey, Billy returns to his roots. White Heather was relaunched in 2021 with a 21-year-old blended Scotch, and is now joined by a 15-year-old edition. Both feature 47% single malt in their blend and draw from top stocks in Islay, Speyside, and the Highlands. The 15-year-old is matured in American and Spanish oak casks for a beautiful blend of honey, malt, wispy smoke, and candied citrus. The 21-year-old is matured in American oak and sherry butts for 18 years, before a final 3 years in PX and Oloroso puncheons. This is plus time in medium toast and medium char Appalachian oak for a final burst of sweetness and complexity. The second story is of Harvey McNair. McNair was the essence of a Victorian Scotsman. He accomplished many trades and travels in his lifetime, and more than anything, he loved and championed the natural, unadulterated color of whiskey. Pure gold, as he called it. Pure gold was the foundation of the whiskey blends he created. Today's McNair unshow-filtered blended whiskey, thanks to Billy Walker, honors Harvey's legacy, marrying peated malt, Highland, Islay, and Speyside with Glenallachie spirit. This is a blend for the peat lovers. To find all of these whiskeys and any Impex product, visit a premium spirits retailer near you. You can also visit Impex at www.impexbev.com or email office@impexbev.com for those harder to find releases. The Whiskey Ring podcast is proudly sponsored by Impex Beverages.
All my sense. So continuing along the timeline, it's 2015, now 2016, you both are on board. And I don't remember if I mentioned this on air or not, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself on air, but I've been binging the Holladay Happy Hour podcast to get even more, information and stories and such to talk about. And one of them, and actually I should mention, that's a distillery exclusive podcast that's made by you guys about the distillery, hosted by Jordan. Kyle, you're a frequent guest. I don't think you're on every episode, but you're a frequent guest. And it's a fun listen. Like, some distillery podcasts are, I'm going to be honest, very dry. Yeah. An ironic term for distillery podcast, but they're very dry. But no, they're fun. They keep moving. They're talking about fun things. So, so in listening to them, one of the stories that I came across was that when you were looking to create this new bourbon, figure out what profile you wanted, 2 things stood out. The first one was that you anticipated the first release being closer to 3 years, and that it just kept getting pushed back because, like, this could get better and better. And finally you got to 6 years and like, okay, this is great right there. And there's also the input of sommelier Doug Frost from Kansas City. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how Doug and the age getting pushed back, or the release date getting pushed back, kind of seem to dovetail together into your story.
Yeah, so they're kind of not related, but are a little bit in some sense. So one, we early on at the 18-month mark, Doug Frost, we called him up and brought him in to try everything. It was, hey, we need to find someone with obviously the experience in this industry, and he's master sommelier, master of wine. So he's at the time was one of 4 in the world with those credentials, and just down the street. And he also does consulting in the spirits world. He's a judge at all these international spirits competitions, creative beverage alcohol resource, I believe is what it's called, the bar program. And so he was a big part of kind of a lot of different areas in spirits. So it's like, well, why would we not bring him up? And so did at the 18-month mark, he sat in the boardroom with, I think, 47 or 48 different samples in front of him of things that we just wanted feedback on. So various floors, various, whether it was a fermentation type of deviation that happened, could he pick that out, or various things in the process, and just overall quality type of questions as well. And so gave him all those samples. He sat in that boardroom for, I don't know, call it 4 hours, and then everyone went in and was like, hey, so should we like shut down right now? Like, are we doing things okay? And he said, no, you guys are on the right path. Like, things are great. Gave us notes for each one, but ultimately kind of gave that encouragement to the board, to make the overall the group that, like, hey, you are on the right path. This is as good, if not better, than a lot of other spirits I've tried of similar age. Keep it up. Type of message. At the 3-year mark, the kind of, you mentioned it earlier, the whiskey business is a terrible financial model of putting things away and just letting it sit. And I think from the beginning, that was the thought of 3 years. Like, that's a pretty big investment. We can probably find something. In the past, we had seen some 3-year bourbons, and it's like, okay, we can probably figure it out at that point. And so I had gone through the rickhouse and was tasked with finding the best barrel for them to present. It was presented to the shareholders, and ultimately they kind of got to taste it and decide where they're at. And so I found barrel number 47 and had presented that, and it was very good. And ended up going back to barrel 47 a lot throughout our time. But at that point, I think they just said, okay, well, we're close. Well, why don't we just go another year? Then we can be bottled in bond. Let's just go ahead and wait. And then it was each year kind of the same story. I would go back, I'd get a couple samples for the shareholder meeting, and I'd present it to them and let ultimately them decide, because it's not my money that's sitting in that rickhouse. So and then it was every year, like, okay, let's wait until at the 4-year mark, let's wait until 5. And then it's at this point, we're close enough. 6 years was always our historic sweet spot. Let's just go ahead and wait until 6. And I think that probably drove Jordan nuts, and the team, especially marketing and on the tourism side too, because everyone kept coming in. When's the bourbon? I thought you said it was going to be 3 years. I thought you said it was going to be next year. How come it's not released yet? What's going on? And it was just a constant, let's just wait. You only get one first shot at releasing a bourbon. And if we can wait, let's wait. Knowing that 6 years was always the kind of entry point for our distillery. 6 to 10 is kind of the sweet spot. And we knew that if we could make it to that, that we'd be making a bourbon that kind of most represented what we were doing in our history. And then, yes, Doug, bringing it back to him. So he came back at the 5.5-year mark, when we had already decided we were going to wait for 6. And I had a pretty good job for 5.5 years, and I wanted to keep it. So I made sure that I brought someone in that could help me in that aspect. So, we go from making bourbon all the time and putting it away to now we have to actually create different, we have to put all these barrels together. We have to figure out how it's going to work. And this is something that, frankly, I was terrified of. It was a new process, just like everything in this was new. But this was going into a bottle for everyone to publicly judge. So that was majorly terrifying. And so just had him come out, and again, similar thing. We had a ton of different samples out there, tons of different options that I'd made up, and just kind of got his opinions and got his thoughts, and he went through and screened everything and gave us notes and feedback. And so that helped early on to hold off, but then also helped again later as we wanted to kind of get to the point where it was going into the bottle.
Sitting down in a boardroom with 47, 48 samples doesn't sound like too bad of a day,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you'd remember it, but it does sound like not too bad a day.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got a master somm, so he's used to the taste and spit method, so he's probably not actually imbibing that much of it during the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he definitely was pretty good about that. We were just sitting in the corner with a glass and like, wait, what? That's what we're supposed to do? No.
No. I know that feeling. Watching some master tasters and master blenders looking at samples, I'm pretty happy with my tasting ritual.
Yeah.
But some of them, sometimes you learn something new, and other times you're just intimidated.
Yeah.
I can imagine being in a room with like a Richard Patterson from the Dalmore kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Where like the guy's nose is insured,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
His nose and Beyonce's legs. They're all insured. Like that's ridiculous. But hey, that's what it and that's why you need a 50-year-old bottling. Anyway. So when you finally got to that, pardon me, that 6 year and you were ready to bottle it, it's coming up on mid 2022. In one of the episodes, it might have even been the first episode of the Holladay Happy Hour. It was Kyle, Jordan, of course, who were hosting. I think Patrick was on there as well. And all of you were reminiscing on how shocked you were at the reception and the initial demand.
Yep.
And I'd love to just go back to that point last year. You know, what led to that first bottling? You know, did you, I guess, well, let me change that. Let me rephrase that. You were also shocked by the reception and by having that long line outside. So had you, done the work in the region to be like, hey, we're coming out with bourbon, show up, and then we're just surprised that people did? Or was it more that you were just shocked overall that people were standing online for 3 hours when you sold out in 3 hours of that first release? What was it like?
Do you want me to go first, Kyle, or do you want to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
So on the tourism and PR side, so we're all a big team, but we all wear a lot of hats, right? So I've got my hands in tours and I've got my hands in the podcast and PR. And so we are all working together to make sure this launch is a success. And so when it came down to planning for this day, we were doubted. Like there were certain people in our company that are like, nobody's going to show up, or, we're not going to have a line. That's crazy. And we're like, yeah, you just wait and see. And then that morning we're looking at each other like, oh my gosh, what if nobody shows up? This could be really bad. So yeah, fast forward to that day and we were as prepared as we could be, right? We had everything stocked. We had our systems in place, and whether 10 people showed up or whether 1,000 people showed up, we were as ready as we could have been. And then I think just when all those people did show up, the satisfaction from that and all the hard work, and after pushing people off for years saying, it's coming, kept telling them, come take a tour, 3 years, 4 years, kept adding people to the list over the years. And so I've got this whole list of emails, sent that out to everybody. And the coolest part, though, is that you see people that have been around the Welcome Center for years coming by. Even though we didn't have a product to sell, they were still coming to visit us, enjoy the grounds. And I just feel like that was one of the highlights of my career so far, I think, is that day and the launch in general.
Yeah, I would echo everything that Jordan said. And then I would also add a little bit of a piece, or a couple different comments as well. So one is that this was back, we were having, like most everybody in the world at that time, supply chain issues. And so we had planned on this release at that time, but we hadn't announced it because we didn't have bottles, we didn't have caps. We were still getting the label. Well, the labels were pretty much all done and ready to go. We had a local source for those, but we just didn't have bottles. And it was every minute we were tracking them like, hey, are they going to be here? When's the arrival date? What's going on? And so we finally got to the point where it's like, okay, we have to announce something. We had put out little teaser videos, right? Like where we just flashed the one bottle that we had mocked up and like spun it and did some cool, whatever, marketing type stuff that they do. But that was a couple months out, and that got good reception, but again, we hadn't announced it. And it was, I don't know, what were we at? Like a month and a half before the release when we actually said, yeah, this is happening. And so that was a big part of it too, is, it wasn't like it was something that we had put a massive push behind because there was still so much uncertainty. We ended up air freighting in bottles because our shipment wasn't going to be in time. And so we had like 800 bottles to sell for this weekend. And so the whole thing was just like kind of rushed together thing from the bottling standpoint, because it's just like this sucks that we waited 6 years and now suddenly the whole supply chain just like falls apart. But so that was part of it, I think, as well, is it just wasn't a massive push that we did. And then when you don't do that massive push, to have the reception that, you know, it sells out that quickly and that we had people in line, like that was just it was just an amazing experience. And yeah, we had gotten there early. Patrick and I had the advantage. Patrick, VP of Sales and Marketing, had the advantage of just sitting up in kind of one of the areas where we could see down the lane if people came and showed up, and we were just getting there early and drank coffee. And finally, we got a couple there, and it's like, okay, this is feeling better. At least we got a few people in line. Good. And then we went up there, and then just it kind of blew up from there. So it was a lot of fun. I think the other thing is that in general, like, I mean, I'm a small town Kansas kid who grew up on a farm, right? Like, you just don't expect certain things. It's not like we're in the middle of Kentucky and we all have this history of working at all the local distilleries, and we came together and put this together, and we knew what to expect. Like, we all have the backgrounds that are from a different thing, and it's just we know what we're doing, and we know that we're proud of what we're doing, and we're doing it to the best of our ability. But still, at times, you just can't help but doubt yourself, because it's just part of life. And I think that was a little bit of, at least for me, what was going through the process. Like, I know I like to drink the bourbon that I was pulling from the barrels, but is the rest of the world going to? That's a very different question. And so just something that I think overall in the process was very humbling, and still is this day, that people, you know, that the fact that we're on a podcast talking about our bourbon, to me, is still very cool. So thank you for having us again, because I enjoy this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. We're used to having our own podcast where we kind of control it, so we know what we're going to say. So this is good. It's kind of fun to be on the other side of the microphone.
Like I said, I like to make it worth the while, make it worth the time of the people coming on. So there's no better compliment than that I can hear than, you know, people are hearing, oh, it's a question I hadn't thought of, or that's something I hadn't thought of in a while, or, you know. Yeah. So that's the best thing I can ask for.
Yeah. Oh, this is great.
So at this point, I mean, I think we've dug into the history, and there's still more that we could ask about, but I want to make sure to also keep moving towards what is in people's hands now and what's available to them. So as I said, this all started with me getting this bottle out of nowhere. I don't, for the life of me, remember if I was introduced to it or if it just showed up on my doorstep, in which case I have to ask how to get my address, and thank you. But still, you know, since then, I've been able to try the first incarnation, so that batch one, and then I also got to try the weeded as well. And a couple of things came to mind. You know, the review that I wrote, and the full write-up, I should say, I refer to it as a review, but it's never just a review. It's the whole write-up. For the first one was, you know, quite laudatory. It because I really liked the bourbon. You guys ended up with, I think, I have to look back at my awards because I don't remember offhand, but I think it was like either best first release, or if you didn't get first, it was second worldwide. So it was very close. I think you did get first. Anyway, I'll double check that. But anyway, the point of it was that I was looking through this, and when I'm looking at awards, which you're now no stranger to, even a year into the bourbon's release, I'm trying to think about, you know, what takes this whiskey of any type to a new level, or what makes it that much more interesting for a consumer. Now, we've all tasted across American whiskey bourbons, rye, American whiskeys that come out younger for a much higher price point, ones that come out older for an even higher price point, or something like that. But, you know, the first batch, the first release of your Ben Holladay bourbon comes out at a $59.99 retail price. So basically at about $10 a year, which is generally the Scotch measurement. So you're at the $10 a year mark for that, which is, to me, a great marker anyway. But to be doing that for a first release is pretty rare. And then you follow that up with something that is $10 less instead of going up. And for a weeded product, which is arguably kind of in vogue right now, it's becoming more and more popular. There are more and more weeded whiskeys, weeded bourbons coming out. So I mentioned that not necessarily to get into the economics of it, but just because of everything else going on at McCormick Distilling, you're able to offer at a certain price point that is not exorbitant. And I looked at that and I said, for $60, I would very happily purchase a bottle of this, for myself and my shelf. And I was lucky I had one sent to me, but even so, it was surprising. And I think that was one of the things that really took it to the next level for me was this is something that's accessible. Yep. It's a premium product, and that's not to take away from the fact that it's a premium product, but premium does not have to be 100 plus 250 plus for something like this. And so it's worth mentioning just because that's not the case with a lot of first releases from distilleries. Especially as you were mentioning with all the supply chain stuff, no doubt those bottles cost more, the caps cost more.
Yeah.
The labels you said you got locally, so maybe not those, but everything else had to cost more to air freight in,
Yeah. So, yeah. It's definitely not always the easiest thing for sure. And there are plenty of costs associated with this. And so, one thing I will mention briefly is that the weeded is line priced, so similar $59.99. So we kept them both the same. So they are still that same price point on that. I feel like I just sounded like a salesperson saying line price.
No,
I kind of hated myself for that. Been hanging out with salespeople a lot lately, and I don't know if I like that or not. But so they're similar. But yes, it's one of those things that we had that discussion, and it is, we want to make sure that it obviously is a payback in return, but is accessible and is something that we can have. We don't want to, you don't want to ever price yourself out where you just end up shutting down your still because no one can afford to drink it or no one wants to pay to drink that. And so it was trying to find that sweet spot. I think we did. We're very pleased with how it's gone with, I don't think people are, you just never know. Whenever you ask people to spend money on your product, you just never know. And so we're very happy. I think it worked out for us. In a positive way, and it's where it should be, I think. And as we go, we'll see. We'll have various releases locally, whether it's around the Kansas City area, whether it's at our Welcome Center, or we'll have additional more of the larger scale releases. So with these products, both the Bottled-In-Bond pieces, so the Ben Holladay Bottled-In-Bond, which is the original mash bill, and then the Holladay soft red wheat. Those are kind of in the Midwest region at this point. So I did a few podcasts early on when it's like, okay, well, these are just in Kansas and Missouri. And so if you're outside of those states, sorry. But we have continued to produce, obviously, throughout the time. And we have finally been able to open up additional markets and go out into the states. And so kind of think the center of the US currently is where we're focused and where we have supply. That's not to say it isn't in other states outside of that, but those are kind of the core region for those two different products, if you will. And so that's kind of where we're at now, and where we're going. We're going to keep this 6-year Bottled-In-Bond one, bottling periodically, and we'll have releases, maybe 5 times a year, give or take, where it's a different type of same 6-year bonded, same price point, but it has different floors in the from the rickhouse on it. And so we keep releasing and keep bottling product, not necessarily each one marketed as a new release per se, but just kind of additional bottlings and different bottling dates that if you see a March 2023, you can compare it to a January 2023 bottling. And those ones have different floors and different breakdowns on that label. And so we're continuing to do that. And then from there, it is a discussion of what's the next step and where do we line out? And we've talked about 8-year, we've talked about 10-year. And then, we have all sorts of experiments in our finishing cave going on of taking the 6-year bonded product and putting into, toasted barrels or various other types of barrels, and seeing where that lines out. And so maybe that will be something that eventually hits. But right now we're just playing with it. And so we have a lot to learn still and a lot to figure out. But we have those two main core offerings that you will be able to find pretty much available now if you're in the center of the US. So
that's a nice little Easter egg for people who really care about the brand to be able to go. I don't know if they'd go necessarily call it a vertical, but to be able to say, oh, this is different than the bottle I have at home or something. And in some ways, I kind of see them as the same way you would look at like a batched, like an Elijah Craig Barrel Proof or a Booker's, and these types of products that come out periodically throughout the year, that they're within a profile spectrum.
Yep.
So it's identifiably Ben Holladay bourbon or the soft red wheat, yep. But with it, their own little idiosyncrasies.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep, that's definitely what's going on. And that's what each one is. I think you nailed it. You can tell it's always the product that it is. We're not going to deviate that far where it's like, what is this? That's not the same. But it is the kind of thing. We have had whiskey groups. The first time we had a second bottling, I think we had a whiskey club that same day. And so we poured the two different ones and just let them go. And they argued amongst themselves for, 20 minutes, and then finally let me continue talking and hanging out. But it was just a lot of fun because everyone does like to have the comparison and the side by side of those products. So
absolutely. And I've gotten to try the first batch of the bourbon, the first offering of the soft red wheat. Mm-hmm. And then I have a friend in Missouri who got me samples of the rickhouse proofs. Yep. So I know the rickhouse proof of the wheat is of that release. I don't know which release of the rickhouse proof of the bourbon is. So I have to check with him and see.
It would have been a different one. We didn't start that.
It wasn't the first one. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. The rickhouse proof, and we use that term. We have that one in one barrel bourbon, but rickhouse proof meaning full proof of the batch. And we started that in our November bottling of last year. And so we've had, what would that be? Three different ones of the Ben Holladay rickhouse, and then the soft red. We've had 2 different ones as well. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I like high proof stuff, especially with American whiskey. I just tend towards high proof bourbons. And I love the rickhouse proof. So I will have to find myself some bottles of those. But even so, I went back and I compared it to the bottles of the other 2 of the Bottled-In-Bond version, the 100 proof. Mm-hmm. And I still maintain that the 100 proof holds up a lot better than other 100 proof whiskeys, American whiskeys.
Yeah.
Again, I'm just someone, for me, I've been told on all of my tasting notes, I've got like, I don't know, I must have over 600 posted right now. I've got 3 times that many that will never get posted. But across the board, the biggest differentiator for me in terms of where the score ends up is mouthfeel.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And it maintains at 100 proof a solid mouthfeel that it just doesn't dissipate. It stays there. You experience it. You have time to experience it before either you swallow it, or if you're tasting a lot of things, if you have to spit it out. But you have time to really enjoy it. And I like that because again, you don't always get that with a 6-year-old, with 100 proof, with any number of things. And as much as I love the rickhouse proof, I'm not disappointed if I can't find that. I'd be happy with 100 proof as well.
Yeah. I think that is a similar comment that we've seen, whether it's locally with people on site, is that, it doesn't just disappear. It's not just a short finish. It's not, it has some viscosity to it. And it's just something that isn't a letdown at that 100 proof. And I'm fully on board. drink from the barrel. So I'm all about the high proof product all the time, generally, because that's just what I'm consuming at work. And so it's but I would agree. It's just not one that disappears for sure, and holds up pretty well, I think. So it's what I'm drinking here at home often. When I come home, I got to be responsible and watch the kids. So I got to step it down from 120 proof just to 100. So
it's very responsible. Kyle.
Very responsible.
Yeah.
I'm just
I was gonna say you
clear. I'm clearly kidding, but yes, but
no, it's fine. It's you if the kids are around, you lean more towards the floor 1 where it's 114 proof instead of the floor 7.
You got it.
So to get into a process question, and for the audience, normally I do ask a lot about the still types, the yeast, the mash bill, the distillation. In this particular case, I'm not asking a lot of those questions. One, because a lot of it's on the website, it's readily available. So I wanted to dig a little deeper into other things. But also because if you listen to the podcast, your podcast, a lot of the questions are answered. So, I'm going to have a question to finish off, pun not intended, about your finishing program in the cave. I'm not going to dive that deeply into it because you have an hour-long episode about the finishing cave, which I loved. I was listening to it again earlier to make sure I didn't miss anything, So that's the thing. I want to try not to double up on things when I think, listen to their podcast. They got some good stuff. But one of the process questions I didn't see originally was, so you're coming off out of the barrel, I should say, but somewhere between 114 to 120, 122, depending on where is in the rickhouse. What is your proofing process like?
Yeah, so we've actually seen, and I'll even widen it a little bit. So in the 1 barrel program, which is what we call single barrels. So we've expanded that since last fall. And so we've seen from that first floor drop down to 111. And we're about to bottle a bourbon from the 6th floor that is 126 proof. So we definitely have seen even more fluctuation in that rickhouse.
Wow.
With most of our products, what we have done is so the Bottled-In-Bond I'll touch in a minute. All the other ones, the 1 barrel bourbon or the rickhouse proof, it's pretty simple. You don't add water. It's we're not doing anything on those ones. Whether we're just letting air blow the lines through, and we're not proofing down at all. And so when people come on site to pick a barrel, if they see it presented to them at 119, oftentimes it ends up being a little bit higher when it's actually in the bottle. Because whereas they all expect the opposite. They expect that we're going to, flush the lines with water, or we're going to do a little bit just with a little extra water. And we're not, we're making it difficult on ourselves. It's so much fun. But with the Bottled-In-Bond piece, so what we'll do is we'll dump the barrels, and initially we're going to rinse the barrels just with a little bit of RO water, as we dump them, just to make sure that we're fully getting all the bourbon out of them. From there, we send into one of the processing tanks, and we're gonna first, we pull off that rickhouse proof version before we add any water. But from there, we do slowly reduce it down. We're gonna ultimately take it down to about 106 proof, slowly, to get it for the filtration. We're not chill filtering. We're not doing anything aggressive on the filtration. We're just making sure that we remove all the sediment and clarify the product. And so that's where we take it down to about that 106 mark for the filtration, filter it, and then we're going to let it sit for a while. Let's call it a couple weeks before we take it down to the final bottling proof. And so I've always heard a little bit more of that slowly proofing down over time helps soften it up a little bit and improve that. Whether it is or is not the case, just from the logistics standpoint, it tends to work well for us. And so it kind of works from that standpoint. So we're going to continue to stick with that. That was one of the things that the process you have to play around with, and we'll probably try different things, and we'll try to experiment with that. That this was what we kind of started when we began. I remember I was in a blending class with Nancy Fraley, and she had talked about the slow water reduction and having, some ways of slowly reducing your spirit from barrel proof down to the bottling proof, and making sure that you didn't add water too quickly and saponify any of the products in there and strip them out when you filtered it. And so I've never proved any of that out. I've never tested it. I've never explored that in any great sense. So I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert in that field. But yeah, so that's what we do in general, is that kind of couple-week process.
It's become a question. No, that was it's definitely, it's a question that very rarely gets asked. And it was Colin at Santa Fe Spirits, I always go back to them, who mentioned it for the first time. And now I ask almost everybody in case I don't hear it on a podcast or something, because no one asks that.
That's true.
So, and speaking of things that no one asks, Kyle, you have that bioengineering background, the bio ag science, all of this. I'm going to put you on the spot. What is the nerdiest topic that you want to talk about, that you think is relevant to talk about, that you don't ever think you're going to be asked about?
Man, that's I don't know. That is a great question that I don't know if I have an on the spot answer for. I mentioned it previously on a different podcast. I love, or on one of our podcasts, is I love just the exploration of the flavor compounds of bourbon. And so the GC mass spec, and running that and seeing what flavor compounds exist, and how different processes in the distillery, different yeast strains, any trials that we do, how that impacts it. And so it's not necessarily something that I can address right now, because I don't have my GC in front of me, so I don't have any of the results. But no, it's just a lot of everyone does expect, and fairly so, bourbon is judged by the taste. That's how you ultimately are judging everything. But there's a lot of science that goes with it, and it's a balancing act all the time. And so I'm tasting and trying a bunch of different barrels, but on the flip side, we're running the lab testing on those in a similar way, so that we can, understand it a little bit more. And we may not ever understand everything, but that's just part of what I enjoy, is just kind of doing the lab stuff as well.
Look, it was not a leading question at all, but somehow I just knew the GCMS was going to come up as part of the answer, if not. So
it's just a lot of fun. That's a tool that not a lot of places have, and it's just for us to have that. I enjoy it. There's a lot of other different things that I'm trying to convince, but man, lab equipment is so expensive. It's hard to justify all of the different purchases, and so but it's just something that as I go through playing around with that, and all the different experiments that we could come up with, and that may be something that we release in the future, and that we get truly nerdy on, is talking about all the flavor compounds. We'll see. Hopefully, we have that distiller's journal on our website, so we can always completely nerd out on that.
Again, like I said, that's you have a lot of on the website that's very transparent about what certain batches are and all that. And that's actually a lead into my second to last question, which is talking about your climate. So you noted in the first batch of the bourbon that you had an evaporation loss of about 32.7%.
Yep.
Second batch was a little lower, it's 31.1%, but it's been around that area. Are you finding that that's pretty consistent across the board?
Yeah, in general, that's kind of where we're at and what we're expecting. That first one, we had a couple different barrels that were completely empty, and that was actually for a different reason. It was when we first started up, we weren't distilling every day, and so we got this barrel truck in, and then a bunch sat around, and they got dried out, and then I think they leaked pretty quickly early on in the process. But we're seeing in that 30% mark at this point. And we haven't dumped a ton that are younger. And so it's hard to say whether, what the percentage is by year. And we'll see as we dump older products where that lines out as well. But with that 6-year mark, 30% is generally what we're seeing across the board. And we'll continue to. And if I don't put this in there, Jordan or anyone, feel free to call me out and tell me that I forgot to put it in there. But we're going to make sure that we continue to put that information in there because I think it is fascinating to see that information. So
I love it. I want to see that. So taking the 30,000 foot view on this, what is your aging climate like where you are in Missouri?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's just a little bit hotter and a little bit colder than Kentucky. So it's, in general, I think I follow a lot of the bourbon world and I social media or whatever, but you can see the same systems that come from here immediately, like the next day are in Kentucky. So if we get a winter storm, the next day it's in Kentucky, same winter storm, just different day. And so it's always very similar to kind of just look across from that stance. And so it's when we look at that rickhouse and that traditional style of aging, I think that is important for us. And it helps that we're like that, because if we were extreme heat, a Texas style climate, or extreme cold where it was like a Montana style, it might not age the way we would be doing currently, and that you'd have to adjust your plan and figure out a way so that you can release the bourbon that way. And so for us, I think it worked out that we're very similar overall to that, and it kind of ages very similarly. Don't know exactly. I'd love to experiment with that and send off barrels of off to different distilleries throughout the world and see how they end up. But that's a product for a different day. That seems pretty expensive. So I
was gonna say that might add another 5-10 onto the line price. So
yep.
But I'm happy paying another 5-10 if it means another piece of lab equipment that's really nerdy that I like, or I'm good with the little investment there. So
okay, sounds good. I'll relay the message.
Yeah. Jordan, you're here as witness.
Yes. You're first.
So all right, so we're down to, I promised, the last 2 questions. The first one is, I'm not even gonna make it a question. I'm just gonna say it. So in listening to the Finishing Casks episode, of all the ones that you mentioned, and I really do encourage people to listen to that episode. It was fantastic, and you learned a little bit more about the geography of the site and the cave, the ancient cave that's there. The 2 that interested me the most, number 2 was the wave stave, because I've never heard of that before.
Yep.
But number 1 was the American Oak Heavy Toast Char 1.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think wave stave is an interesting one. We'd worked with Independent Stave Company before on barrel trials very early on, where we actually aged product in this. And so we have a 6-year-old product in one of these barrels currently. And so they take the barrel, and it's I don't know enough about the toasting process, but I believe it is a toasted barrel ultimately. But they cut these staves before they build the barrel, and they cut a little wave into it. And so it's basically a way to expose the bourbon to more of the wood. It increases the surface area inside of the barrel, but while still being a 53-gallon barrel. So then at the end, they do a quick char 1 on that, just so that it continues to be bourbon. But it's relying more a little bit on the toasting and the seasoning standpoint of things. So yeah, we have 6-year product, and then we also are doing that finishing where we took 6-year-old bourbon, dumped it from the original char 3 barrels, and put it in our ancient cave in this product, and so, or in that barrel. So we will see how it ends up. We're just playing around with it right now. We got one of those, and we just want to see what happens throughout the phases, and we may I always give the caveat, these are sold on site, so it helps from that standpoint, but we may take them too far. We don't know if what we end up in the bottle is the perfect version or not. We are experimenting, and that's the whole point of an experiment. So we'll see on that one. The other one you said was the American Oak Heavy Toast Char 1. Is that what you said? Yeah, so it'll be very similar. And I actually just opened that one up yesterday, I believe. And so it's been in there about 9 months. And it's just one that, that toasted barrel has really come around recently, and it adds a different layer and a completely different flavor profile to it, that what you normally don't see. And so it provided a lot of sweetness to it, and changed it in a way that I don't know for sure what we would have known or what we would have expected, but it's very, very different from where we're at. And I think it's for a good thing, but I'm also not fully convinced that we're ready yet. So we'll see on how long that one goes. But yeah, with the toasting ultimately, and you probably have talked about this before, a lot of people know, but the toasting is Independent Stave Company, or whoever the cooperage is, will send it through essentially an oven and just kind of heat the barrel up slowly and try to manipulate the wood compounds through a different way through the heat, rather than just that flash char. And so I always give the marshmallow analogy. The toasting is roasting slowly over the campfire and letting that marshmallow caramelize and slowly melt, and then the charring is throwing it in and letting it catch fire. And so two different ways of cooking a marshmallow, but when you scale it up to a barrel, similar thing. It's just two different ways of making a barrel that can change the flavor profile, and that's what we're playing with Independent Stave on some of those things. And we've done different trials with them, and so it's just a lot of fun. And hopefully we are trying to get them to come on our podcast and talk too. So we'll see. Maybe in the future we'll have that. But
hey, good luck. Those cooperages, even when you're close to them, they're sometimes difficult to get on. I got Kelvin on as an early guest, and I was like, "Ooh, that's as close as I'm getting." So, no, I'm very interested in what's coming next, and we'll close out by asking, you're in the Midwest right now, product wise. What are your plans for expansion for the next couple of years? Where you want to be?
Yeah, so I think we will have to partly see how that goes. It's the kind of thing where we're rolling out the new markets as we go, and as we have the product available, and we want to be able to. We never want our product in the markets that they have been released to become like completely allocated that you can never find. If you like Ben Holladay or Holladay Soft Red wheat, and it's in your market, we want you to be able to find that. Maybe it may not always be on the shelf. That who knows? Bourbon is a weird world, but like we don't want it to be the point where it's just like gone forever. And so we're taking a very strategic approach of which states do we add when, and how can we do that, and that's so that's where we're at. So we'll see. We want to make sure that we do it in a way that we don't make a lot of people mad at us in the process. That like, hey, we can't buy your bourbon anymore. We really liked it. So. But no, I think it's we hope that we're throughout the Midwest and that it's selling well, and we are continuing to ramp up. And there's always discussions of other expansion opportunities in the future, and what does that look like. And so we'll see on that front. But for right now, again, when we started making bourbon, it wasn't a completely everyday thing. And then we kind of slowly built that up. And so we're going to slowly have more and more production over time. And so availability to expand. And then we'll just see if it continues to expand beyond that. I would personally love another rickhouse or two. So hopefully everyone likes our bourbon and keeps buying, because I would love to have that. So it'd be a lot of fun.
Get music on the phone. You got a rickhouse from the 30s and one from the 60s. So I think it's time for a third or fourth.
I think so. Yeah. Seems right for sure. Yeah.
All right. So with that, we'll start closing out. Kyle, Jordan, thank you both so much for taking the time today to talk about this. I'm thrilled to finally get to talk about the brand, have both on, talk about the history, the process. I'm quite excited for what is coming next. Hell, maybe I'll have the opportunity to do a one barrel with you guys in the future.
Yep, absolutely.
And,
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, and I'm just looking forward to seeing what happens. So as always, we're going to have not only the tasting notes and such in the show notes for this episode. We'll also have links to all the social media where you can buy and find bottles to buy of Holladay and the soft red wheat. We will also have a link instead of, well, this time it's going to be just a link to your guys' podcast, because that is where most of the on-air research came from. And any other relevant links as possible, we're going to throw in there. And, if you listen to this and you do want to do a single barrel from them, let me know, because as much as I would love to, I can't buy the entire barrel myself. So I will need some support on doing that. But in the meantime, Kyle, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on. Hang out with me for a second. It's been another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast, and I will see you all next week.
Thanks for having us.
Hey folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.